It's just fascinating to compare the history of the internet with what's happening now with Bitcoin and blockchains. And the internet, of course, had a much, much bigger impact than people would have thought. And I think a similar thing will happen. We will see in Bitcoin and crypto.
Hey guys, welcome back to Altcoin Buzz Spotlight with me, Leah Heilpern. The show where we speak to entrepreneurs, innovators, and thought leaders in the cryptocurrency and blockchain space. Joining me today is filmmaker, media entrepreneur, and consultant Torsten Hoffmann. He debuted as a director with his film Bitcoin, The End of Money as We Know It. The film since won 4 awards and has been credited with bringing tens of thousands of new people into the space. The follow-on documentary, Cryptopia Film, will be released this year. Don't forget, let us know in the comment section below who you want us to interview next, which topics you want us to cover, and if you enjoyed the show, then hit the like button. Torsten, welcome to Altcoin Buzz. How are you doing today?
Thank you so much for having me. I'm doing great.
Yeah, really excited because this is a really interesting one because we're not seeing a lot of documentaries about crypto right now. And I think, it's just one of those things which is going to bring about mass adoption, in my personal opinion. So I just want to go straight into this and just find out as much as possible, essentially. So take me through it. How did you first decide to start making films about Bitcoin and crypto? People must have thought, you're crazy because your first film was before, the bull run, before crypto even got any credibility.
Yeah, and you mentioned the key word about mass adoption, and my first film is a good example. So my first film I made in 2014, released in 2015. It was a lower budget film just about Bitcoin. The word or the whole industry blockchain didn't really exist at the time. And even though it was a relatively low budget film, we ended up licensing it to I think 25 different countries. We were on airlines, in-flight entertainment systems. We were heavily pirated at the time. And I just actually licensed it legally to a YouTube channel. And within 10 days, it achieved 200,000 views, I think 7,000 likes and 1,000 comments. So the topic is really big. And I think a good documentary can really draw people in. So and the way I see it is really a documentary like this is for almost for the mainstream, like people who are interested in the topic, and then they slowly fall down the rabbit hole, right? Then at one point they end up at a show like yours, right, to find out even more. Then they buy a book, and maybe finally then they end up being an investor or a programmer or something like that.
Yeah, and there is a lot of content related to Bitcoin, to crypto at the moment, but not so much for the layman, the normal person, the non-coiner, as we sort of say, who's not in the space. So it is interesting just to see something which acts as a gateway in some way. But why crypto? What is your affiliation with crypto?
Yeah, so I made So I worked with a lot of documentary filmmakers before that. So I ran a media company. And at one point, it was kind of clear that I'm going to start making my own film with one of my partners who's been a long-term documentary maker for many, many years. And I also have a finance MBA. And back in those days, I actually wrote a paper about alternative currencies, those alternative paper currencies. So there was no Bitcoin then. And when I then learned about Bitcoin in 2013, it just kind of clicked for me and I made a film. And I think everybody has a similar discovery story or rabbit hole story, right? They just become so convinced and do something. For me, that was filmmaking.
Yeah, it's true. You sort of stumble across this space. I think that's what happens. Somebody mentions something and you're sort of like, okay. And then something happens and you just go down that rabbit hole and there's sort of no coming back, right? Like, I don't know anybody that's, heard a little bit about the space, played around a little bit, dipped their toes in and has not gone down that rabbit hole. So I'm not surprised at all. So take me through the films, right? Because you've got another one which is sort of being released on the website, but iTunes and so on is coming. Who are the most interesting people that you've actually met on this journey doing these films?
Yeah, Bitcoin, The End of Money as We Know It from 2015, that was, the typical early adopters and all the big names back then. I produced that one in Australia and America mostly. And Cryptopia, so that's the new film. It's called Cryptopia. Bitcoin, blockchains, and the future of the internet, which is also the 3 acts in the story. And again, we kind of revisit some of the big brains and big egos that I've met 5 years earlier, and some new people. And it's always fascinating to just talk to some of these thought leaders, or maybe just random, like this one professor from Oxford that really provided some value. And I got the chance to meet the co-inventor of the internet, which was a legendary figure.
That sounds amazing. So I just want to quickly just mention to our audience, though, that we will be showing a clip of these really exciting people that you met a little later. So definitely stick around. So like you said, you first heard about crypto. I think you mentioned 2013, you heard about it. So you obviously had that base knowledge understanding. But from doing these documentaries, speaking to these people, speaking to the likes of, people behind the internet, what did you learn about crypto while making this that you did not know beforehand?
So maybe one historic note. I'm into history, and I kind of in both films explore a little bit of the historic parts of the story, and it's just fascinating to compare the history of the internet or the web with what's happening now with Bitcoin and blockchains and the evolution, right? And the major learning there is, of course, it is always overhyped. It's always that hype cycle. We get overexcited and think it will revolutionize, change money forever, the end of money as we know it. But of course, it takes much, much longer. It takes decades. And then the internet, of course, had a much, much bigger impact than people would have thought in the 70s, 80s, or 90s. And I think a similar thing will happen. We will see in Bitcoin and crypto. So that will be one learning. The other learning, making Cryptopia, certainly all these other narratives that start to develop, right? I mean, early on, it was money, it was currency, medium of exchange, digital gold is a little bit more recent. And then all these other new blockchain applications, especially all the Ethereum-based protocols. And those narratives are new, and I was learning along the way.
Yeah, and I think, looking at how the internet started, how we sort of didn't expect, the normal person didn't expect it to take off in the way that it's done. I want to go into this a little more because it's really exciting. You mentioned a lot of different Bitcoin narratives there. So where do you stand on this? Do you think Bitcoin is actually going to revolutionize the world, revolutionize traditional finance as we know it? Could it become a global currency? What do you see for Bitcoin in our future? Say 10 years down the line. We know it takes time. We know it's not happening tomorrow.
Yeah, I think Bitcoin has a very good chance to become sort of like a digital gold or some sort of a digital asset that will become increasingly prevalent in everyday portfolios, stock portfolios. People, your friends ask you, my friends ask me. I mean, that is happening. And I think in 10 years' time, it could really be a significant new asset class for sure. I'm not so sure about the currency bit. I think in some certain countries, maybe in some certain internet economies, it makes total sense. But I'm doubtful that people will lose faith in their currency that fast. But maybe I'm wrong. Look, I mean, what's happening now at the moment, right? It's so hard to predict even what's going on in a month's time.
Yeah, it's true. And, this sort of comes down to that comparison between inflation and hyperinflation, and I speak to a lot of people and they say right now in the West, we don't necessarily need an alternative currency for inflation purposes, but other countries do. So I think, like you said, it's such unprecedented times. We'll sort of see what happens from that. But I want to talk to you about altcoins because altcoins are an interesting one. The term shitcoin floats around quite a lot. People sort of say they don't see any value in it. So do you see value in altcoins? And are there any altcoins which actually pique your interest?
Yeah, so I'm going to tackle that question slightly differently. I think there's a fundamental group of hardcore Bitcoin maximalists, right? That basically say everything but Bitcoin is crap. And I don't fall into that category. I think that's a little bit ignorant. I do think that Bitcoin is probably the only store of value. It has a chance of becoming that, but that doesn't mean everything else is nonsense. And I just saw a recent tweet by Eric. He basically said, well, look, there's Bitcoin, there's Ethereum, and there's a lot of other protocols that may have value. And then there's everything else, which is probably just speculation. And the interesting bit, the kind of what you're asking is, what is that number 3 category? So what is not Bitcoin, what is not Ethereum, but what is the interesting bits that we should be looking at? And I think there's probably a space for an anonymous currency. There's probably a space for something lightweight, something this or that, or maybe something for certain digital communities that just use in that website, in that network, a native currency. And I'm no expert. You look, I'm a storyteller, right? I'm trying to find the most interesting people and stories.
Yeah, and I think that makes sense. I've been in this space for a couple of years now, and I sort of agree with you along that narrative. I've found value in other things other than Bitcoin. Of course, there's value in Bitcoin, but there is value in a couple other things, which isn't Ethereum either. So it is interesting to see how this narrative will play out, and I think over the next few years, we'll see where that value really is. But in terms of crypto projects then, are there any particular projects that you have your eyes on and you think that's interesting?
So maybe just to double click on what you just said. So even if maybe some of these altcoins won't survive long term or will be supplanted by bigger networks, that doesn't mean that there's not a trading opportunity, right? I'm not a trader. What do I know about trading? But there's certainly people making money, other people losing money. Same with ICOs, right? There's a lot of scams, but also it's a good thing that young entrepreneurs from anywhere in the world can raise money now without going through the traditional venture capital route with all the white guys in Silicon Valley making decisions. So it's always good and bad. And to you specific questions, I mean, I'm looking at some of the Web 3.0 applications, maybe like Brave browser. I'm not a user myself, but things like that do interest me because I think they have the opportunity to reach tens of millions of people.
Yeah, and I totally agree with you. Brave for me is also a really interesting one. Paying people for their attention. It just sort of, puts the power back to the people, doesn't it? It's sort of something that we've not had for a while, and it sort of flips it around. Gives people value again, and I think that's also a really interesting one for me.
And of course, I mean, again, good and bad, right? The fundamentalist would say, well, but there's still a company, Brave, that company is in charge. It's not totally open and all that. And I understand this. And look, I think it's too early to tell. I think Brave has a lot of traction. Like I said, I'm not a user. I can't really comment on it. But those kind of projects I find highly, highly interesting.
Yeah, I think that's another issue that we hear a lot about. It's supposed to be decentralized, this space, but slowly, as innovation happens, we're seeing different sort of more centralized projects emerging. But, you don't have to buy into that, do you? So you have Cryptopia Film coming out very, very soon. I think you mentioned that it's sort of come out on the website, but you can tell me a bit more about this. But first, I do want to play a short clip.
And now, some of the big brains and big egos who champion cryptocurrency claim they are building a crypto utopia.
Magical things will happen.
With something called blockchain technology, and it just might change your life.
And they really could compete with, if not even take down, the Facebooks and the Googles and the Amazons.
My name is Torsten Hoffmann, and in this documentary, I'm going to put some of these claims to the test. This innovation has enabled a lot of criminals and scammers. But basically, looking at it now, you lied to us. Forget all the hype. We'll explore the true potential of this new invention.
So clearly some really exciting names, and I'm very excited to give this a watch. So can you tell us a little bit more about this?
Yeah, I mean, this is a huge production. I hope you could see that. I mean, helicopter shots, 3D animation and graphics, and all the big brains and big egos. Look, we produced this over 2 years a period, and on 4 continents, I think 7 countries, I believe. So it's a huge effort, and it's just so exciting to finally, release it to the world. Originally, I was going to travel around the world doing all these events, and we did a few big ones. But after 5 countries, coronavirus kind of stopped that. So I was forced to release it on cryptopiafilm.com, and soon we will be on iTunes and Amazon and all these platforms.
And how do you expect it to do? Because I know the first one, it sort of blew up and it's sort of credited for bringing tens of thousands of new people into the space. Totally, unexpected. So how do you expect this one to do?
Yeah, I think it will be a slow burn, and I kind of hope for that, right? Because it is a word of mouth. I don't have marketing budgets. I can't compete with the big studios or the big, documentaries that are out on Netflix. But I do think the film captures all these narratives in our industry, right? Starts with Bitcoin, blockchains, and then Web 3.0. And there's so much detail, so many interesting projects highlighted that I do think that people like you, people like your friends or your audience will hopefully get a chance to see it and then recommend it to someone else, and then it will hopefully grow over time.
And how did you then decide to sort of say, I want this to be that gateway? I'm not going to get too technical. I'm going to sort of keep it, for the normal person to be able to understand. How did you navigate around that? And I guess sort of decide, not to make it too simplistic.
Yeah, that's an interesting balancing act. But quite frankly, people like you are too good to compete with. I mean, you you put out so much content, right, on a daily or weekly basis. There's so much content. So
daily basis.
Exactly. So, and a documentary like this, it takes 2 years to make. So it must for sure have a shelf life for, let's say, 5 years. So I'm not really interested in what's going on today or last week or last month. I'm talking about the fundamental narrative. So that would be one answer. And the other answer is I'm also looking at the conflict, the drama, the interesting moments and historic kind of turning points of this a new and controversial industry. And I think my film kind of captures that zeitgeist.
Can you mention a couple of turning points, a couple of key points in the industry that you talk about in the film?
Yeah, I mean, one is certainly I interviewed Vitalik in 2014, where he just kind of figured out what an ICO is, how to fundraise, and he kind of says, okay, we're going to sell Ether for this amount of Bitcoin. I mean, it's crazy if you look back at it now. The other big one is of course the Bitcoin civil war, the first fork with Bitcoin Cash. We have a little bit of content about that. The ICO period. I mean, we try not to whitewash history. I mean, there was a lot of funny and ridiculous and scammy stuff going on, so we have a little bit of fun with those. These were just a few of those.
So just finally, as an overview for our audience, what can people then expect from this? Just an absolute overview.
Yeah, so I think this film is by the community. I'm part of this community for the community. So everyone who's even for longer time than I was in this space, will get something out of it, because you wouldn't have seen that secret Bitcoin bunker. We were the first camera crew to ever be allowed in there, just as an example. But even the people just outside at the fringes, maybe your friends who still don't know what you're doing all day or still don't understand why you're so excited about it, show them this film, because it really shows all these narratives. Why is it unbanking the banking the unbanked? Why is it digital gold, right? And all these narratives. And people hopefully will get an understanding of why we're so excited about this industry.
Yeah, and I, for one, am super excited, because I think what I'm going to do is, whenever my friends ask me, my family ask me about crypto, I'm just going to show them the film. I'm done explaining it at this point, because I don't think they get it. Someone will say to me, well, how do you make money in Bitcoin? I don't understand. It sounds like magic money. It's not even real. I'm going to send them the film. That's what I'm going to do.
And again, this is the entry gate, like you said earlier, right? I mean, that's the first start. And then they have a conversation with you, have even more questions, and then end up at your channel or with other projects or something like that. So, but we need that entry door, and hopefully my documentary can be part of that.
Absolutely. Torsten, I want to thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure hearing your perspective on crypto, on Bitcoin, and understanding more about what this film entails. So thank you so much.
Thank you.